unfortunately, we stand here again today announcing murder charges against a violent felon who is prohibited from possessing a firearm. This is the third time in the 16 months that I've been in my position here in Chicago that we're announcing murder charges against someone who murdered one of our law enforcement officers during a robbery. In this case, like the others, the defendant allegedly possessed not only a firearm illegally, but a high-powered firearm, a conversion device, firearm affixed with a conversion device.
In the early morning hours of July 30th, Deputy Wardlaw was approached by the offender, a 32-year-old Cordero Thompson, who announced a robbery while Wardlaw was seated in his vehicle at a gas station. An exchange of gunfire ensued between Deputy Wardlaw and the offender, who fired at Deputy Wardlaw with two weapons simultaneously. Approximately 69 rounds were fired in total by the offender. Deputy Wardlaw fired one shot, striking the offender in the leg. Deputy Wardlaw was struck in the chest and subsequently fled the scene and was involved in a traffic crash. A second victim was grazed in the foot. The offender arrived at a nearby hospital for treatment for the gunshot wound he sustained and provided false information about his identity to officers who arrived at the hospital. He then left the hospital and took a rideshare to another hospital where he continued to provide false information about his identity. Detectives learned about the offender's movement between hospitals and injuries consistent with video that showed the offender with a leg injury at the scene, which helped them identify him as the individual who shot Deputy Wardlaw. He was placed into custody less than 3 hours after the shooting. The investigative response team immediately conducted a gunshot residue test on the offender, which later came back positive. A DNA sample was obtained from the offender and analyzed with blood evidence that was recovered from the scene. The analysis showed the DNA was a match.
What he was doing that night. This is someone who has 2 prior gun offenses for which he was convicted. The first was a 2015 unlawful use of a weapon where he was sentenced to 4 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. That sentence being delivered on January 27, 2016. He later picked up a Class 2 unlawful use of a weapon by a felon. In a 2020 case, he was sentenced to 8 years in the Illinois Department of Correction. He was released on mandatory supervised release on January 15, 2023. He was released from mandatory supervised release earlier this year on January 19, 24. To the question of why he was released in 2023 on an 8-year sentence, he get credit for 50% off, plus the time that he was.
Listen, we can talk about policies. Obviously, we need tougher laws. We need tougher gun laws. We need more accountability when it comes to people who are committing acts of violence. But at the same time, policies are not enough. We need people to get engaged. We need people to be involved. When we look at our communities, especially those communities that are the most harmed, we actually need people to step up. We need people to come to the table and work with us because we're willing to work with those people. All too often we see this type of violence on a daily basis in the city. And, when we bring someone to justice, it gives us a feeling of comfort for that moment until the next one happens. And then we start all over again. At some point, we've got to get everybody involved. Everybody has to step up and be a part of the solution. It can't just be policies. We can't solve these problems with policies.